Welcome to the Ask Sensei Tony podcast, where Sensei will address your questions about life from a cosmic perspective. Please subscribe and ask a question at AskSenseiTony.com to find out more about studying with Sensei privately, becoming a part of our spiritual community, and training to become a mindful minister of oneness in our seminary. We hope you enjoy this episode and find it helpful.
Hi, I'm Sensei Tony, and today's question is coming under the designation of oneness with ourselves. And this question comes from Claudia. And Claudia asks the question, is it true that as we start to accept that we have oneness within ourselves, we can learn to stop chasing, grasping, clinging, or demanding love from others? If an individual understands oneness, is the statement, I know that I already am love, or whatever that thing is that a person is searching for, an accurate statement? Please share your thoughts. Thank you, Claudia. So I want to start by seeing that I'm going to reframe this so that I hopefully understood what you're trying to say. And that is that as we become more at one with ourselves, we start to find the things that we need within ourselves. And we don't have to kind of grasp for them outside of ourselves. I hope that's an accurate assessment of that. So, I would answer simply yes, that the more we experience oneness with ourselves, the more we realize that the things that we need most comes from within. I think one of the easier ways to talk about this is something that you asked about, which is love. So if you know me, you know we have to define our terms. So love's a big word, and it's a very important word in our practice, and it certainly is foundational from a Buddhist point of view. The Buddha basically said that we should make love our basis, our way, our foundation, and our practice. So love was very important. And, we have all kinds of great, one-liners, like all you need is love. And so love is this big, big, powerful word. But I think in order for us to really work with it, we have to define the term in a way that the mind can easily work with. So for me, the definition of love, I might say, in my opinion, the Buddhist definition of love is related to the word compassion. So I define compassion as wanting to relieve suffering in myself and in others. So I want to relieve suffering. Love, for me, starts with the compassion, and that I want to relieve, I don't want you to suffer. But it adds on that I also want you to be happy. So love for me is the wish or desire to be free from suffering and to be happy. So that when that's how I say the word love, or I think of love, that's my basic foundation. So we talk a lot here about compassion and what that means, and the idea of relieving suffering, which is the raison d'etre of our practice. And that suffering ultimately is created from a sense of separation, that somehow we don't feel like we belong. And we begin to feel isolated and cut off. And there's lots of reasons for why this might naturally happen, and it might even be something that naturally has to happen. When we start out in the womb, and as a baby in the womb, we're so deeply and intimately, physically connected to the structure of our mother. You talk about oneness. And then we're born. And then we move out into the world. And if we're fortunate, And if it's healthy, we continue that bond with the mother and also other people that we're close to and other creatures. But at some point, along with other aspects of our development, we start to, and again, this is at a very unconscious state, we start to have needs, right? So we're hungry, and we're not consciously thinking we're hungry, but we begin to sort of, that natural connection we had when we were in the womb, where everything was just sort of taken care of. Now there's a space there, right? And hopefully the mother feeds us, or the parent feeds us. And so, we have that connection again. But now there's this little space, right? And as we start to get older, and somewhere, a lot of folks think that somewhere around the age of 3, we start to recognize that, there's an out there. And often this is accompanied with the development of speech. And that's why we start to name everything. We start to say, what's that? What's that? What's that? I remember my son was little, that was the constant thing. What is that? What's that? And he spoke very, very early on. He was speaking, he was speaking in, some sentences like, don't do it. We had a thing where if we had like outlets. We lived in a big farmhouse, and there were outlets in the house, and we didn't want him to touch them. So we'd point to it and say, "Don't do it," and he would say, "Don't do it." And he was very sharp language-wise, and so he was speaking in somewhat sentences. By the time he was 6 months old, it was weird. People were shocked; they'd hear them speaking, And so he learned to develop language very early on. But most of us, develop it somewhere in that period, in that range, and then we start to name everything. We want to know the name of everything because that gives us a sense of connection to it, or gives us a sense of control over that space that we're unconsciously experiencing. And when you think about it, it's kind of cool because all of our mythologies, or a lot of our mythologies, begin with the first being, and of course the Judeo-Christian tradition, you have Adam, and naming things, and everything has its, name. And so that gives us a sense of connection to it. But there's already a sense of separation going on. And language is the way within which we give light to these experiences. And we begin to sort of, start to experience a little bit of separation anxiety. And then as we get into, maybe the age we go off to kindergarten, or we preschool, what have you, now there's this separation anxiety that occurs. And like I say, different people have slightly different orientations, but somewhere between 3 and 5, somewhere in that range. And you start to have this, separation anxiety. And quite honestly, I think that on an existential level, that's the source of a lot of our problems. We have kind of this great existential separation anxiety. And so when we're little, it's so important that we have people in our lives, it's traditionally has been our parents, that they show us healthy ways to be connected. That they show us a healthy way to belong. And so that's why I would go so far as to say that children need to be shown love. They need to have that contact, that touch, that speaking, that holding, They need to have that in their lives. And they have to be shown what to do. I think it's critical that humans have to be shown when they're little what to do. And they have to be loved. They have to be shown love. But then, there's a stage where we hopefully mature, and we start to move beyond that childhood stage, and we start to move into a place where we can begin to do it differently. And the thing that I say is that when we're little, someone has to show us how to love. But as we become mature and we become adults, the great secret, or the great truth is that everything that we need is within us. And if we want to experience love, everything we need can come from giving it. So, to make that sort of clear, when we're little, we need to get it. We need to understand it. We need to experience it. And then when we become adults, we switch to a place where we learn to give it. And that if I want to experience love, and all the things I need, I can get that from giving it. If I give love, I will know love. If I share love, I will know love. And that is the quickest way for me to understand and sort of overcome a sense of separation and a sense of belonging. Now, that being said, the reality is that for a lot of people, they never were really shown properly how to do that. And it's something that I talk about a lot, and I've said many, many times, that if you want to make the world a better place, then being a parent is probably the most powerful role you ever have, or playing a guardian or parental role in someone's life, because it's that role whereby you shape and you help that person become whole. And if you want to make the world a better place, and by goodness, just have better families and better parenting, because all problems have a tendency to come out. Every person that goes wrong, started somewhere. So if you want to change the world, you got to start with yourself. You got to start with your own family. You got to start with your own children. You got to start with your own situation. And if you do that, trust me, you'll make the world a better place. It's so important. But all that being said, obviously that doesn't happen. And in my work as a chaplain, and working in prisons for many years, and then running a halfway house for several years, what I experienced was the people in prison, male and female, they hadn't been shown that correctly. Most of the time they weren't shown love. And so, they don't know how to give it. And yet, deep down, they desperately want it. And so, when you're working with someone who is chronologically older, and they never, received the kind of love that they needed, it becomes really important to try to give that to them as adults. Because they need to be shown how to do that. They need to be shown how to love. And when they begin to learn that, because they're adults, they can very quickly learn that they don't need to have love given to them. They can learn to give love and get everything that they need. And so, when I work with people that have had tough upbringings where there was, they weren't getting that kind of love that they needed, then my first thing is to try to be a person in their life that really loves them, that I want them to be free from suffering, and I want them to be happy. And so, of course, I'm going to share with them the teachings of the mindful living teachings, and I'm going to try to help them to understand that happiness is a side effect that comes from being clear in one's thoughts. And as that develops, then I want to kind of move them to a place where they begin to care for others. Traditionally in the Buddhist tradition, we talk about this as two stages of the working of what we call the precepts, or the intention and the power of intention. And the first part of the precepts are all about non-harming, ahimsa, non-harming. And then once we've kind of received that compassion, we're shown that love, then we can move into the bodhisattva stage, where we can start to help, and we can start to give love. And that both of these qualities of the precepts of non-harming and the precepts of helping, this comes and creates in us what in Buddhist language is called bodhicitta. And this is this enlightened, being, this enlightened energy that starts to flow from us. So here's what I suggest to you if you want to test this out, because as the Buddha said in the Kalama Sutra, that, don't take my word for it, test it for yourself to see if it works. Because the reality is, especially today, you're not going to really practice anything that you haven't found for yourself actually works. And so here's a practice that I would offer you. When you are feeling like you're not loved, and you're feeling sort of that separation anxiety, try an experiment of going out and sharing and showing love to someone else. And it can be very simple. Like a very basic practice I offer people is smiling. Go out and just decide that when you see someone, you're going to smile. It doesn't have to be, they'll think you're crazy, but just a genuine sort of place of warmth. Hi. And hello. Hello. And just by doing that, you will find that there's this bodhicitta, this energy that starts to sort of percolate. And you feel connected. And you feel love. And, that's the big secret you learn, that as an adult, all the love that you need and all the love that you want to experience comes from giving it. Giving it to others. Giving it to yourself. Giving it to others. And you will have all the love that you need. And I don't know if Claudia is implying this in her question or not, but something that comes up in my mind is, well, what if I'm, I want a friend, or I would like to have a lover or a partner, and I want to kind of move to that level. I honestly believe that if you begin with these very basic practices, and of course now that is a whole foundation, right? So the practice of mindful living begins with, the precepts, and then it goes to the practice of meditation, and it goes to the practice of mindful analysis and inquiry. All that stuff is going to make you clear, make you more at one with yourself. But this sort of simple practice of going out and giving love, doing random acts of kindness and showing that, you'll begin to experience it. I think that newer science on neurology and stuff is showing us that, we're not really designed or wired for selfishness, that scar that we have comes out of this evolutionary stage where, survival was the most important thing. And as we kind of evolved these big frontal lobes and, cortex is, we sort of moved that survivalism to the realm of the ego, and now the ego has to survive. So again, it's, becomes about status and survival. But I think what mindfulness does is it allows us to see that we were never really separated, and that separation is a delusion. And that once we kind of even just take on that idea of interconnectedness, and that we're not truly separate, that we're actually truly one, and that we actually belong to the universe. And we have that cosmic perspective, that I love to talk about. Then we can begin to experience it ourselves. And I think that what newer science is showing is that we're actually wired for the connection, and that the selfish behavior, things of that nature, they're born primarily in that survivalism, which is a reaction to our evolutionary history, and also to this existential separation anxiety. It's like the difference between being lonely and alone. And I don't think it's just mere semantics. Loneliness comes from a sense of separation, isolation. We don't belong. And being alone can be a very powerful way to experience oneness. Learning to be alone and to be comfortable being alone is a very powerful way for us to experience that oneness. And there's a word we have that we use in English that's monk, and it comes from a Greek word, I believe is monakos, and it means one, and it can mean solitary, but it truly mono, it means one. And so I think of the idea that everybody has this inner monk and this inner oneness, and that if we cultivate that through the practices, and we start sharing and generating that, we start to realize that everything we need is within us, and everything that you need is within you. And as we interact with each other, that interaction reveals the great variety and depth of oneness in the universe. And so, if I want a friend, be a friend. If I want a lover, then use friendship to see if I can take that relationship into a deeper level. Sometimes I'll be able to, sometimes I won't. But I can begin to explore. And there's no fear anymore. And if there is fear, I know how to deal with it. And that's how you do it. You share love, you give love, you get all that you need. And the more you kind of create that kind of cultivation, that's the kind of person that you are, you will attract people to you. And then the opportunities for the different types of connections you can have will become clear as you explore and you experiment. So some people you're connected to, you may want to explore, a friendship that goes deeper into some sort of romantic or physical relationship, but the other person may not be there. And that's okay, because you're allowing yourself to kind of experiment and engage and kind of explore. And believe me, the more that you do that, and the more you put that loving energy out there, you will find those connections. You will find that kind of alchemy, we call it, that, creates that kind of bond. And you learn to love beyond, your normal definitions of it. We have what we call the bodhisattvas, or the enlightened being who knows that his enlightenment, her enlightenment is dependent, mutually interdependent. We have this saying, we call it the Bodhisattva's way of life. And it is to live fully, love freely, and give completely. And so, we're talking here about love. So to learn to love freely means to give your love beyond the normal places that you would let it be. We kind of quarantine off who we're going to show love to, who we're not. But once you kind of expand that and you kind of allow love to be something that is expressed more universally and beyond the boundaries that you normally would have placed around it, it's pretty wild. You begin to experience it in a new way. But as I say, the best thing to do is simply start by practicing. And when you go out and practice, it's always good to kind of, especially when you're starting out practices, to kind of take a sort of a scientific approach to it, whereas you want to kind of treat it as an experimental action. So I always suggest to people that before they go out and try something like this, they write down what they think it's going to turn out like. So let's say a person says, okay, I'm going to go out and practice smiling, right? I'm going to practice that for a day. And then before you go out and do it, say, here's how I think it's going to turn out. And then go out and do it. And then after you've done it, come back and then sort of contemplate and say, well, how did it really go? What was the reaction? And I think any experiment that you do requires multiple sort of turns. In other words, so if you're going to practice smiling, don't just do one day. Give it a week. And give yourself a multiplicity of experiences and examples that you can use. And you'll be amazed at how two things. One, humans are terrible prognosticators. So most of the time what you think something's going to be like is very different from how it turns out. And how it turns out has a lot to do with how you're thinking about it going in. However, if you can open yourself to this practice, we talk about is not knowing, which means to kind of mindfully, have my perception of what I think is going to happen, and then, take a deep breath and step back and just kind of plunge in and try the practice. And then after I've done it, from that spaciousness, then I can bear witness to what happened, and I can contemplate that. And then what that does is that creates a sense of encouragement in me. Because the more that I see that these practices are working, the greater confidence that I develop. And the greater confidence I have, the more likely I am to sort of take it into all aspects of life. So I hope that helped. I hope that was helpful, Claudia. I hope that helped. Thank you for your question.
You've been listening to Ask Sensei Tony. Please visit our website at AskSenseiTony.com, check out Sensei's books and videos, and become a part of the Dragonfly spiritual lifestyle.